set it up. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion, trying to keep up with you, and I don't know if I can do it. Oh no, I've said too much. I haven't said enough. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try. Every whisper, every waking hour, I'm choosing my confessions, trying to keep eye on you, like a hurt, lost and blind fool. Oh, oh no, I've said too much. I set it up. Consider this, consider this, hint of the century. Consider this slip that brought me to my knees, paled. What if all these fantasies come flailing around? Now I've said too much. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try. That was just a dream. That was just a dream. That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight, losing my religion, trying to keep up with you, and I don't know if I can do it. Oh no, I've said too much. I haven't said enough. I thought that I heard you laughing. I thought that I heard you sing. I think I thought I saw you try. But that was just a dream. Try, cry, why try? That was just a dream, just a dream, just a dream, dream.
An historic day in Rome. Pope Francis and Pope Emeritus Benedict appeared together in the Vatican gardens as Francis issued his first encyclical. The letter to bishops about the role of faith in Christian life was largely written by Benedict before he stepped down in February. The Vatican also announced that Francis is making two of his predecessors saints. Francis said that for the second time, John Paul's intercession led to a miracle, the curing of a Costa Rican woman suffering from a cerebral aneurysm. Two miracles are required for sainthood, but Francis also approved the canonization of Pope John the 23rd, though only one miracle is attributed to him. John reigned from 1958 to 63 and convened the Second Vatican Council, which reformed the Church. His body is on display in St. Peter's Basilica. A joint canonization ceremony for John the 23rd and John Paul II is expected later this year.
In lieu of the fact that the modern church proclaimed John the 23rd, Angelo Roncalli, a saint, it is necessary to reveal that he truly believed and promoted, along with his detrimental impact on the church. As an individual, first must understand Angelo Roncalli before one can truly understand the new church he helped to create. When John the 23rd was elected, the church had never been more powerful in terms of nominal adherence and potential influence, and yet it was still tilting at the windmills of modernism and dissent. As strongly organised anti-Catholic and anti-religious forces worked against the church inside and out to corrupt, weaken and destroy her, John the 23rd sided with modernists, anti-clerical liberals and revolutionary socialists. Far from being mere transitional, easy controllable pope, he introduced major heretical changes, especially regarding interreligious dialogue and worship. His false doctrines were accepted without question because he was considered to be the Pope. John the 23rd was a wolf in sheep's clothing, deceiving countless souls by means of false obedience. Many were misled by his words of goodwill, separated brethren, brotherly love, and unity that fooled people into thinking he was going to change things for the better. In order to introduce revolutionary, sweeping changes, he had to trap people into thinking things were so bad in the church that radical changes were needed in its liturgy, government, ministry, and apostolate. John the 23rd was a master deceiver with the cunning of an old fox. In a fiercely divided world, he refrained from making moral judgments when required to do so, thereby sidestepping the controversies of the time. He used his charisma to become a crafty politician. He certainly knew how to manipulate people and appeal to both sides, aligning with liberals or conservatives, depending on each situation and the particular group he was addressing. He neither reprimanded heretics nor warned Catholics of their false teaching. John the 23rd wanted the church to abandon the defence position she had maintained, and the precursor of Paul VI, he laid the foundation for a new church. He used the Second Vatican Council to substantially change our Lord's message and replace it with moral relativism, socialism, and secular humanism. Everything could be questioned except the supreme authority of John the 23rd. According to him, condemnation of heresy was uncharitable and superstitious. At Vatican II, modernist reform replaced the deposit of faith. Since real unity with non-Catholics can only be achieved by adherence to the truth, his misguided charity did not bring about conversions, but only meaningless conversations and false, empty unity. When Pastor Schwartz, prior of the Protestant Taz community, expressed his desire to change things at the Vatican, John replied, "Patience, patience. I can't do everything at once." In 1894, Marc Sagnanger founded Les Ciliens, a French religious political movement to bring Catholicism closer to the ideals of the French Republic and socialism. Father Roncalli was deeply moved by one of Sagnanger's speeches. In 1910, Pope St. Pius X condemned and disbanded the movement. The Holy Father said that Les Ciliens is a miserable tributary of a great movement of apostasy organised to establish everywhere a universal church that will have neither dogma or hierarchy, and which under the pretext of liberty and human dignity will bring about in the world the legal reign of delusion. Intellectual pride was one of the causes of Roncalli's abandonment of the faith. From his seminary days, Roncalli was fascinated by the latest enlightened ideas of liberalism, modernism, and socialism. Instead of rejecting the shallow irreligion of modernism, he abandoned traditional Catholicism because he considered it outdated superstition, and irrational. Like the Freemason vulture, Father Roncalli did not consider himself nature, weak and prone to evil, but rather good and reasonable. In 1950, after Sagniter's death, he wrote the following words to his widow, even though Sagniter's prepared the way for the modern church by promoting modernism and socialism. The fascinating power of his words, of his mind, ravished me, and I keep of his person and of his political and social activity the most vivid memory of all my priestly youth. One cannot render homage to a liturgy more eloquent to the memory of his distinguished Frenchman, in whom his contemporaries appreciated the clarity of his profoundly Christian soul and the noble sincerity of his heart. Modernism is based on selfishness and a debased love of the world. It allowed Angelo Roncalli to deny teachings of the Church while still calling himself a Catholic. His modernist beliefs permitted him to believe whatever he wanted as long as he felt it was right for him. Roncalli's loss of faith took place gradually through his close connection with modernists. By choosing the name John the 23rd, Roncalli surprised everyone, because for more than 550 years no pope had used that name. The last time the name John the 23rd had been used was in 1410 by Balthasar Cosa, an illegitimately elected antipope. He was deposed by the Council of Constance on May 29, 1415. Throughout the history of the Catholic Church, there have been 41 illegitimate popes called antipopes. These men were either impostors or were uncanonically elected, making them illegitimate successors of St. Peter. The name John the 23rd was considered unusable because the last claimant to the same name was an ex-pirate who had massacred, cheated, and purged his way to the papacy. One wonders why Angelo Roncalli chose to take the name of such a scandalous character. Father Charles Rooks said, "I'm quite sure John the 23rd chose this name, the name of an antipope of the 15th century, quite consciously, to show he had been irregularly elected. Roncalli's use of the name John the 23rd should have raised red flags to those familiar with church history and caused Catholics to seriously question his pontificate and actions." Very few individuals have affected history as negatively during the 5-year period as has the false Pope John the 23rd, the mastermind behind Vatican II. During the years following his death, millions have lost their faith and left the church. Due to the actions of John the 23rd and other modernists, unfortunately, many will never experience the beauty and wonders of the Catholic faith Christ established.
Going now from the United States to the global church, Pope Francis canonizes 7 saints, including Pope Paul VI. Some 70,000 faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square for the canonization mass this past Sunday. In his homily, Pope Francis called now St. Paul VI a prophet of a church turned outwards to care for the faraway poor. Pope Paul VI was elected Pope in 1963 when the sexual revolution was in full swing. He might be best known for his 1968 encyclical Humanae Vitae.
On June the 22nd, 1963, Paul VI delivered his first public message to the world. His words were well received by Protestants because he no longer described them as separated brethren, but called them by the sweet name of brothers. He never mentioned conversion or return to the fold, although he spoke of Rome as a fatherly home, Paul VI assured them that the continuation of the Second Vatican Council would be his principal task. In his inaugural allocution given on September 29, 1963, beginning with the second session of the Vatican II, Paul VI masked his modernism when he declared, "The reform that which the Council aims is not an upheaval of the Church's present way of life, or a break with its essential or venerable elements in her tradition. Rather, it is an honouring of tradition, in the very act of stripping it of what is unworthy or defective, in order to make it genuine and fruitful." In his general audience of July 2nd, 1969, Montini declared, "If the whole world is changing, will not religion change as well? It is a new religion, the cult of man, in which divine revelation and supernatural are excluded. This is the religion of Freemasonry. Freemasonry informs us that there is only one true religion, and therefore a natural one, the cult of humanity." Dr. Albert Outler, a Methodist theologian and author who attended Vatican II for 4 years as a non-Catholic observer, brilliantly described Paul VI's devious work during Vatican II as Reformation style, Roman style. He declared, "Unlike Luther's drastic break with the medieval past, it is a Reformation which is often so subtle that it sometimes does not seem like change at all. It is a Reformation in which radical ideas blossom in traditional Latin garb, in which new ways are inevitably coupled with warnings against imprudent excess. It is a Reformation not of acts but of attitudes, whose distant goal is the ultimate reconciliation of the Church with other faiths in the modern world." On August 6, 1964, Paul VI issued the encyclical Ecclesiam Solum, His Church, a 15,000-word document on the mystery of the Church. In his writings, he chastises traditional Catholics who do not accept the changes, telling them that a spirit of rebellion and criticism is not in accord with charity. Paul VI told them to exercise the virtue of obedience. However, this is false obedience, because the fourth commandment obliges us all to refuse to obey a sinful order. Through the centuries, many sincere Catholics have been misled through false obedience to illegitimate authority. Long ago, Freemasons boasted, "We will destroy the Church by means of holy obedience." The 16 documents of Vatican II are filled with heresy, ecumenism, indifferentism, condigiality, modernism, and false religious liberty. Paul VI solemnly ratified these documents, for each concludes words with "we," by the apostolic authority conferred on us by Christ, joined with the Venerable Fathers in approving, decreeing, and establishing these things. He was a Marxist and a modernist heretic. He officially approved and promulgated the new Mass and had substantial changes made to the sacraments of the Holy Eucharist, confirmation, and extreme unction, rendering them invalid. It is quite clear to all who are willing to see that Paul VI could have never been a true pope. He automatically separated himself from the Catholic Church before he was elected, when he first taught heretical concepts and consistently continued to do so. Prior to his election, Montini publicly professed anti-Catholic doctrines, including modernism and ecumenism, thus making him incapable of the office of the papacy by divine law. Therefore, he was a false pope, having no authority and jurisdiction. Therefore, because his acts were null and void, Catholics were not obliged to follow him. After his election, the examples of Paul VI, explicit heresies, and numerous, especially regarding the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the liturgy, religious liberty, and ecumenism. He taught heresy and supported heretics. Anyone who honestly analyses the situation truthfully and objectively will conclude that he was a false and illegitimate pope. The legacy of Paul VI proscribed the Trinitine Latin Mass. He eliminated several holy days of obligation. He formulated a new Mass and new sacraments. He treated with hostility the defenders of the faith. He lifted censures on Freemasonry, CDC Art 2335, allowed communion to be distributed in the hand. He abolished abstinence from meat on Fridays in 1996, created episcopal conferences with no definite limits. He permitted Orthodox and Protestants to receive the Eucharist. He downplayed devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and the saints. His decree for mixed marriages did not require Catholics' baptism of children. This was later included in the 1983 Code of Canon Law. Refused to receive groups of traditional priests and laity, but happily received modernists, Freemasons, communists, leftists, and the enemies of the Church. Replaced the more traditional-minded figures in the Church with liberal modernists, pro-communists, and allied Freemasons. During his 15-year reign, more than 55,000 priests left the priesthood, including 30,000 were laceted. In addition, more than 50,000 nuns abandoned the religious life. He is responsible for propagating the charismatic renewal movement throughout the world under the direction of Cardinal Seunistus. Former Grand Master of Paolo Gustastini, Roman Centre for the Grand Orient of Italy, in the Freemasonic magazine La Rivista Massonica, lamented the death of Paul VI. They said, "To us, it is the death of he who made the condemnation of Clement XII and his successors fall. That is, it is the first time in the history of modern Freemasonry that the head of the greatest Western religion dies not in a state of hostility with Freemasons. For the first time in history, the Freemasons can pay respect to the tomb of a pope without ambiguities or contradiction." Since the proclamation of the documents of Vatican II and the new Mass, many Catholics, including bishops, priests, religious, and laity, have refused to follow the heretical antipopes and be part of a new church. Catholics realise that a pope who proclamates heresy or is guilty of public manifest heresy when teaching the universal church is a false pope. Heretics are not members of the church.
As crowds gather before the Vatican in St. Peter's Square, the almost incredible news is released to the world. Pope John Paul I is dead. The announcement is received with a mixture of disbelief, shock, and sadness. John Paul, the smiling Pope as he came to be known, had won the hearts of Catholics and non-Catholics throughout the world, during one of the shortest reigns in papal history.
Although seemingly unknown and not a major player of Vatican II, Cardinal Albino Luciani became Paul VI's successor on August 26, 1978. On the fourth ballot, he received the required 2/3 majority votes plus one of the 111 cardinals. Cardinal Siri received 11 votes. Lord Chester received 1. Luciano chose the name John Paul I to show he would continue the work of his heretical predecessors, John XXIII and Paul VI. Amazingly, this conclave had the same problems that had occurred during the election of John XXIII. regarding smoke and a proper fitting cassock. When the ballots were burned, the chimney from the Sistine Chapel produced black smoke, white smoke, and then grey smoke. The crowd in the piazza became so confused that many left and went home, even though the papal tailors, the Gaminarli brothers, made 4 white cassocks. They never considered Luciani as papable. When Paul IV donned the extra large cassock, he seemed to be swimming in it. Instead of having a papal coronation, he wrote a simple initiation ceremony and received a woolen pallium as Patriarch of the West. He never received nor wore the papal tiara, a symbol of authority over the universal church. This supported the Vatican II concept of collegiality, that the Pope is just another bishop. As a member of the Pontifical Commission that studied artificial birth control, Luciani often recommended its use. In 1968, as Bishop of Vetro Veneto, he submitted a confidential report to his predecessor as Patriarch of Venice, arguing that the recently developed contraceptive pill should be permitted by the Church. He planned a meeting for October 24th to discuss allowing Catholics to use artificial birth control. Luciani pledged his pontificate to the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. He placed a high value on collegiality and sharing of the power with his bishops. He gave high priority to the revision of the 2 codes of canon law. Union with other denominations would be pursued. The 30-day reign of John Paul I and his untimely death are wrapped in mystery even today. Many questions remain. One cannot properly understand what occurred without having clear knowledge of the secret of Vatican Bank, the IO War. On the day following his election, John Paul I told Secretary of State Cardinal Villot that he wanted to audit the IO War. Villot became very frightened. Something had to be done fast. There was to be a review of the entire financial operation of the Vatican, a detailed analysis of every aspect. No department, no congregation, no section would be excluded. Pope Pius XII established a Vatican Bank during World War II in order to have an independent source of funds to maintain charitable institutions. In 1939, Bernardo Nogara headed the Vatican Bank after being approved by a panel of cardinals. He wrote its charter and was to protect the assets of the Holy See. Unfortunately, Nogara may have been a Nazi spy. On June 27, 1942, the Vatican Bank became known as the Instituto per la Opera e Religione, the IOR, with its sole office located in the Vatican City. With little oversight, changes occurred rapidly, and secretive, questionable banking practices ultimately led to the corruption and rampant abuses. The Mafia and Freemasons had now their foot in the door of the clandestine Vatican IOR. In order to avoid detection, they used fronts and holding companies to acquire other banks and properties. The IOR became an excellent place to launder money. As a sovereign state, the Holy See cannot be subjected to any ruling by any foreign court. It remains an institution with over 50 billion in securities, gold reserves that exceed those of some industrialized nations, real estate holdings that equal the total area of many countries, and opulent places containing the world's greatest art treasures. When John Paul IV was found dead on the morning of September 29, 1978, Cardinal Villot fabricated a story saying he died peacefully of a heart attack while reading his meditation book, The Imitation of Christ. Villot told reporters that people should not be concerned, since John Paul I had a history of heart problems. When journalists probed deeper, this story began to unravel. During recent checkups 6 days earlier, his physician, Dr. Antonia Della Ros, declared that John Paul IV was in very good health and did not have any heart problems. The 65-year-old Luciani had low blood pressure, so a heart attack was very unlikely. John Paul I could not have been reading the Imitation of Christ, since his personal copy was still in Vienna. Also puzzling to investigators was the fact that his skin began taking on an ashen colour, similar to what occurs after poisoning, except for point-blank denials of foul play. The Holy See has done nothing to officially investigate the suspicious death of Paul I. Research done by David Yallop and Abby Natanis conclude that John Paul I died during the early morning of September 29, 1978. Sister Valencia Taffel, who had faithfully been bringing coffee to him between 4:30 and 5 a.m. since 1959, knocked on his door after noticing the coffee she had placed in his study was left untouched. She then entered his room just before 4:45 a.m. to check in on him. What she saw resembled something from a horror movie. John Paul I's lips were pulled back in a macabre grimace, his gums exposed, and his eyes appeared to have popped from their sockets. He was either on the point of death or barely dead. Whilst clutching a sheaf of documents, she felt his pulse. She was terrified. Sister Valencia turned off John Paul I's alarm clock when it rang at 4:45 a.m. and immediately contacted Father Lorenzi and Father Maggie, who called Cardinal Vallet. The strange events that followed presents the question: who had pre-knowledge of the death of John Paul I? On October 2nd, 1978, when John Paul I was laid in state, Vatican City Associated Press reporter Himili Torres noted that he had a waxy ashes appearance in the casket, and that the viewing had to be interrupted to allow morticians a chance to touch up the makeup on the corpse. Public viewing at St. Peter's Basilica ended at 7 p.m. The body was then examined by a group of physicians until 9:30 p.m. What occurred during this examination is still unclear. What happened to the body during the hours before the funeral remains shrouded in mystery. Since there was a several-hour window following the public showing of John Paul I's casket was stored prior to his funeral, there is a good possibility his remains were cremated to cover the crime. What are the odds of someone opening 3 hermetically sealed coffins after his death? Whoever committed the murder of John Paul I tried to cover their track at every stage. From the finding of the body to its embellishment, it would seem only logical that they would want to complete the job they started and destroy all evidence. They must have realized that if the casket were open, DNA could still possibly prove that a crime was committed. Tony Des Francis offers several logical possibilities, since the Vatican claimed to have hermetically sealed the body of John Paul I within 3 coffins. It would have been extremely heavy. The tombs would have contained any of the following: the first, the body of John Paul I; the second, the body of another deceased individual; the third, his ashes; and the fourth, a ballast. When someone asked Freemason Cardinal Baggio what's next on the Vatican agenda, he simply replied, "Now we make another one." It didn't take long. Once John Paul II was elected, all memory of John Paul I faded from sight and mind as if he never existed. It was fortunate for the murderers that there was no cry to canonize Paul I or exhume his body. It was deemed best to let sleeping dogs lie.
As soon as the banner was unveiled, St. Peter's Square broke out into applause. On May 2, 2011, John Paul II was beatified. 6 years before, more than 1.5 million people gathered to bid him a final farewell in Rome. The date was April 8, 2005. Wentz turned the pages on the Gospel sitting atop his casket. John Paul II had passed away 6 days earlier, and the world reacted with cries of "Santo subito," Saint now. Sickness consumed his life bit by bit, but it was never an obstacle to continue preaching the Word of God, even in his last moments when he didn't have a voice. John Paul II was Pope for 26 years and 5 months, one of the longest pontificates. Racking up the miles from his extensive travels around the world, he could have made the trip to the moon 3 times. With each visit, he was able to touch the hearts of people. In 1978, after a 3-day conclave, his peers elected Karol Wojtyła as successor of Peter.
Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, is considered by many to be the most influential person of the 20th century. He has been called John Paul the Great and a superstar. Statues have been erected in his honour, and holy cards bear his name and image. Yet in spite of all these and other tokens of admiration, as with most individuals after death, the glory of the world passes quickly. Although the new church canonised John Paul II on April 27, 2014, in order to justify his endorsements of modernism, ecumenism and secular humanism, he culpably ignored the terrible plight of thousands of victims who were sexually abused by clergy in the new church. Born in Wałodus, Poland on May 18, 1920, Karol Wojtyła was given the nickname Lolus, Charlie, that eventually became Lolek. Wojtyła's closest childhood friend was a Jew named Joseph Bezenstock, and said that although Wojtyła never spoke to him about Catholicism, Lolek was very interested in Judaism. Although Bishop Wojtyła was only 42 when he arrived at the Second Vatican Council, he made 22 written interventions and 8 oral interventions. He was one of only 10 Polish priests that the communists permitted to attend Vatican II. Bishop Wojtyła, who was present at every session, helped Conger and de Lubac draft the pastoral constitution of the Church in the modern world, and assisted with the writings of the Declaration on Religious Freedom and the Decree on the Media of Social Communication. During the council, Wojtyła came in close contact with many influential modernists, who later went on to elect him in 1978. Interestingly, Cardinal Garon said Wojtyła would never have been elected during the conclave of October 16, 1978, were it not for his visibility at Vatican II, where he referred to communism in a positive light, promoting ecumenism and encouraged dialogue with atheism. On May 29, 1967, Paul VI appointed 74-year-old Archbishop Wojtyła as Cardinal. Wojtyła became to realise that working with communists had its advantages, and he could travel freely and enjoy life. Those who opposed communists, like Father Jerzy Popieluszko, were tortured and killed in 1973. In 1973, Wojtyła toured Australia, the Philippines, New Guinea, France and Belgium. 2 years later, he went to Rome. In 1976, he spent 6 weeks visiting the United States. Travelling the world made Wojtyła well known to the cardinals who elected him a few years later. When the CIA realised Paul VI had only a few months to live, they sent Cardinal Cody, who had worked with them for decades, to Poland to ask Cardinal Wojtyła, Archbishop of Krakow, if he was interested in becoming Pope. During the first conclave of 1978, Wojtyła received a number of votes. Author Father Andrew Creeley accurately predicted Wojtyła would succeed John Paul I on October 3, 1978. Cardinal Karol Wojtyła had a heart exam taken and brought the results with him to the Vatican in case he was elected in the conclave, since he did not want questions about his health to be an obstacle. Author Wilton Wyan noted Wojtyła's unusual behaviour. He wrote, "Wojtyła always takes along some reading matter wherever he goes, and during those long periods of voting in the conclave, he was calmly pursuing a book of political theory by Karl Marx. When a fellow cardinal asked if he didn't feel sacrilegious to read such an author in that sacred place, he answered, with a good-natured smile, "My conscience is clear." John Paul II was not the Marian Pope some may come out to be. On June 26, 2000, he released the Third Secret of Fatima. The counterfeit bears little likeness to the genuine version. Sister Lucia wrote the entire Third Secret on one sheet of paper. The Third Secret version the Vatican composed in the year 2000 version is 4 pages long. Whoever composed the counterfeit version should have at least made it the same length as the original. On October 13, 1917, Our Lady of Fatima performed a miracle of the sun that was witnessed by 70,000 people so they would believe in the apparitions. Therefore, one should summarize the Third Secret of Fatima should be important and inspiring, not commonplace and ordinary. On October 16, 2002, John Paul II boldly changed the rosary given to the world by Mary by adding the 5 luminous mysteries. John Paul II's coat of arms contains a shield, a sans serif, letter M, beneath the extended right side of the distorted cross, surmounted by the papal tiara and papal keys. Although quite simple, it conveys a clear message. Although some presume the M stands for Mary, what does it really mean? John Paul II is no longer alive to answer such questions, but his legacy points to 3 loves of his life: modernism, Marxism, and Masonry. The letter M was printed on his stationery, and an elongated cross on the letter M were engraved on the lid of his coffin. Traditional Marian monograms place an aureate Old English style letter A on top of the letter M to represent the words Ave Maria, Hail Mary. A crown often surmounts these letters. John Paul II was the world's leading ecumenist. He joined in ecumenical prayer in Protestant churches, Jewish synagogues, Muslim mosques, and Buddhist and Hindu temples. He also taught to reconcile differences between Catholics and Anglicans, addressed 80,000 Muslims in Morocco, prayed at the Buddhist temple in Thailand, spoke to his great admiration of Hindus in India, apologized for Christianity's role in the destruction of native religions in North America, lays out areas of common ground between Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists. According to Wikipedia, John Paul II hoped to place his church at the heart of a new religious alliance that would bring together Jews, Muslims, Christians in a great religious armada. On October 27, 1986, at the ecumenical gathering at Assisi, Italy, John Paul II joined in prayer with Buddhists, Hindus, Jain, Jewish, Muslims, Sikhs, voodoo priests, and Zoroastrian representatives, medicine men, snake worshippers, and witch doctors, and said, "With the world religions, we share a common respect for and obedience to conscience, which teaches all of us to seek the truth, to love and serve all individuals and people, and therefore make peace among nations." John Paul II failed to mention that people can have earnest consciences. One might ask, why didn't the apparent leader of the Catholic Church take the opportunity to teach the assembly about the one true God, the Blessed Trinity? His mind was on other things. In 1988, John Paul II established the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, which fosters dialogue with all non-Catholic churches. He met with as many leaders of other Christian denominations as possible. Waiota spoke 8 languages, wrote 5 books, 11 apostolic constitutions, 14 encyclicals, 15 apostolic exhortations, and 45 apostolic letters. His book, Love and Responsibility, opposed many teachings of Pope Pius XI's encyclical Casti Connubii. In 1994, John Paul II became the Time Man of the Year, and his picture filled the front cover of magazines more than a dozen times. Although he was the most popular person in the world at the time, what answer will be given to God for the millions of souls he led astray? To ensure the changes of Vatican II would be permanent, John Paul II appointed 3,682 bishops, 90% of those living at the time, and created 231 cardinals during his reign. He gave over 12,000 speeches, translated into 55 languages, and attended 13 World Youth Days. With his charismatic personality, John Paul II, during his extensive travels, could have converted millions, yet he made no effort to instruct non-Catholics about elements of the Catholic faith and did next to nothing to inspire Catholics to practice their religion. Unfortunately, as a narcissist, he used the trips to further his image. During the 26-year reign of John Paul II, thousands throughout the world suffered permanent scars by being sexually molested by priests. In America alone, there were 100,000 victims of sexual abuse. In 2007, the Los Angeles Archdiocese paid out $666 million to 508 victims of clerical abuse, the largest such settlement. The question remains, why didn't John Paul II come to the victims' defence and punish the predators, priests involved and bishops who sheltered them? The Vatican instead tried to conceal the matter and silence the accusers. When the extent of the sexual abuse crisis became publicly known in the 1990s, John Paul II delayed before calling American bishops to Rome. Amazingly, no one was castigated and the matter was glossed over as if it never happened. Thomas Doyle, who worked at the Vatican Embassy in Washington, D.C., witnessed Rome's response to the American clergy sex abuse crisis firsthand. After receiving amounts from bishops, sending cables to the Vatican and viewing their responses, he became fed up and couldn't understand why John Paul II could not have understood the gravity of significant numbers of priests raping and violating little children. John Paul II completely revamped the entire canonization process in the Apostolic Constitution Divinis Perfectionis of January 25, 1983. The only miracle used to raise John Paul II to the status of blessed remains questionable. The Vatican had nagged doubts about the miracle from the beginning. Sister Marie Simon Pierre's story had seemed too good to be true. A member of the Little Sisters of the Catholic Motherhood in France, she was diagnosed in 2001 at the very young age of 40 with Parkinson's, the same disease that afflicted Pope John Paul. It has been suggested, however, that Sister Maria Simon Pierre did not have Parkinson's disease, as there was no easy way to accurately diagnose the disease short of medical autopsy. Sister Marie Simon Pierre also suffered a relapse, though the Episcopal Conference of France disputed that the relapse, which would have been thrown the purportedly miraculous nature of the cure into doubt, was anything more than a rumour. More serious questions about his life remain unanswered. Under John Paul II, the Catholic Church, modern church, was becoming a saint factory. The Pope was canonising, beatifying Christian heroes at a rate of almost one a week. More saints were canonised during John Paul II's reign than during the preceding 400 years. John Paul II canonised 482 new saints and beatified 1,338 others. John Paul II ruled the modern church for 26 years. During that period, more Catholics lost their faith than any other time in history. Some statistics show an increase in some nations, yet these numbers list baptized Catholics, not practicing ones. Many in the third world countries retain pagan, tribal beliefs and practices. Also, many support artificial birth control, adultery, cremation, euthanasia, homosexuality and premarital sex, and disagree with regular mass attendance and the need for prayer and the seven sacraments, and the de fide teaching of the Church regarding the divinity of Christ, the blessed Trinity, the real presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist, the Immaculate Conception, papal primacy and infallibility. During the horrific clergy sex abuse scandal, John Paul II looked the other way and seemed to pretend it never happened. Many bishops culpably allowed known sex abusers to prey upon innocent victims. As a result, many lives remain permanently scarred. Because of Wojtyła's inability to make the necessary decisions, rampant and clerical sex abuse had continued unchecked and had directly resulted in mass deteriorations from the faith in many countries. By March 2006, the official audit for the US diocese for the previous year reinforced the belief that clerical sexual abuse continued to be the biggest problem confronting the Church. There had been 783 credible new accusations of sexual abuse against American clerics lodged that year, 81% involving male victims. The American diocese paid out compensation of nearly $500 million. This represents an increase of nearly 300% over the 2004 figures of $157.8 million. Although John Paul II knew the Vatican Bank, the IO war, was corrupt to the core, he kept Marcinkus in charge and even made him his personal bodyguard on trips abroad. During the final year of John Paul II's reign, other scandals erupted, one involving Martin Frankel and an attempt to blink more than $1 billion in secured assets from the insurance companies throughout the United States. After the Frankel affair came to light, the insurance commissioners Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma and Arkansas filed a federal lawsuit against the Vatican in accordance to a Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, claiming that the Holy See was involved in a criminal conspiracy to steal the frozen assets of 9 insurance companies. The lawsuit claimed damages in excess of $600 million. Receiving word of the criminal charges, John Paul II reassured the members of the Roman Curia that the Vatican as a sovereign state was immune from such legislation. "Ignore them," he said, "it will pass." Then the Holy Father added, "We haven't lost any money, have we?" John Paul II was a great actor and charismatic individual who foreign holiness deceived millions. He slyly replaced Jesus' gospel with the social gospel and Christ's teaching with his own. His words could be interpreted in many ways, so everyone across the board felt like the Pope supported their cause. His message was based on humanism and modernism. Through occasionally, he spoke on spiritual topics if it was appropriate for the occasion. A good shepherd would never allow his flock to run wild, graze in poisonous pastures, be exposed to wolves, eagles, coyotes, and other predators, and act as if it wasn't his responsibility. How could a pope, a supposed vicar of Christ, tell people that all religions are equally good and encourage people to pray to their false god while he prayed to his? John Paul II was a narcissist whose life ultimately centered around himself, popularity, power, influence, and money. He advanced his cause by collaborating with Nazis, communists, modernists, and ecumenists, ultimately becoming the most popular person on earth. He turned the papacy into a travelling stage where showmanship and personality cult allowed him to spread socialism and secular humanism worldwide. Although the media idolised him, he was ultimately a man without a message. He cared nothing about uplifting his crowd spiritually or raising their eyes heavenward. There was too much glitter on the earth to pass up the chance to present itself. He was merely an entertainer, dealing with ratings, polls and popularity. His personal charisma gave him celebrity status worldwide. If John Paul II had used his outstanding talents to teach and defend the Catholic doctrine and instruct the masses, he could have converted millions. Instead, he left them in darkness and error while seeking personal acclaim and fame. People only see the face, God sees the heart.
We do begin this morning with that news out of the Vatican. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95.
The retired pontiff had been ill for some time and had declined in recent days. We're going to look back at his life and his impact on the church and the complicated legacy that he leaves behind. But we do want to begin with
In November 1945, Joseph Ratzinger attended a seminary in Franzingen, Germany. Its rector, Alfred Lappel, had him read books by modernists, atheists and non-Catholic authors. During his 2-year philosophy course, Ratzinger disliked works by St. Thomas Aquinas, but eagerly read those by Delebruck, Fichte, Guarini, Kant, Heidegger, Netzkens and Wurst. He enjoyed the modernist liturgical writings of Odo Cashel and Romano Guardanani. Benedict XVI, as Joseph Ratzinger, was a leading modernist theologian at Vatican II and left a long paper trail of his errors. He was the chief architect of a new theology of the Church, which consists of a people of God and a Church of Christ, not identical with the Roman Catholic Church. A super church or a Franken church created from elements of the true church that are possessed either fully by Catholics or partially by heretics and schismatics. The bond holding this ecumenical beast together is Ratzinger's notion of a church as communion. As a cardinal and John Paul II's chief doctrinal advisor, he developed this idea in the 1992 CDF letter on communion, the 2000 Declaration Dominus Jesus, the 1983 Code of Canon Law, and the 1997 Catechism. Here are some typical positions from Ratzinger's teachings. Schismatic bodies are particular churches united to the Catholic Church by close bonds. Universal churches is the body of churches. Schismatic churches have a wounded existence. The universal church becomes present in them particular churches and all her essential elements. The Church of Christ is present and operative in churches that reject the papacy. One becomes a member of the people of God by baptism. The whole people of God participates in the office of Christ. Christ's body, the church, is wounded. Christ's Spirit uses schismatic and heretical bodies as means of salvation. Each particular church is Catholic, but some are fully Catholic. These teachings are contrary to the article of divine and Catholic faith. I believe in one church. One in the creed refers to that property of the church by which she is undivided in herself and separated from any other in faith, discipline and worship. Ratzinger's teachings are also contrary to the teaching of the Church Fathers and the universal ordinary magisterium that heretics are outside Catholic communion and alien to the Church. Pope Leo XIII. Such lists could probably continue for pages. Our point is, each item can be categorized either as an error, a contradiction or a change in substance of teaching of the pre-Vatican II magisterium, or as an evil, something offensive to God, harmful to the salvation of souls. But the same faith tells us that the changes are wrong, also tells us that the Church cannot defect in her teachings or give evil. One of the essential properties of the Catholic Church is her indefectibility. This means, among others, that her teaching is immutable and always remaining the same. St. Ignatius of Antioch. It is impossible for her to contradict her own teaching. Further, another essential properties of Christ's Church is her infallibility. This does not apply, as some traditional Catholics seem to think, only to rare ex cathedra papal pronouncements, like those defining the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption. Infallibility also extends to the Church's universal disciplinary laws. The only explanation for these errors and evils that preserves the doctrines of the Church's indefectibility and infallibility is that the clerics who promulgated them somehow lost as individuals the authority of the offices in the Church they otherwise appeared to possess. so that they never possessed such authority before God in the first place. Their pronouncements became jurisdictionally void and could not bind Catholics, just as the decrees of the bishops in England who accepted the Protestant heresy in the 16th century became void and empty of authority for Catholics. Such a loss of authority flows from a general principle in church law. Public defection from the Catholic faith automatically deprives a person of all ecclesiastical offices he may hold. If you think about it, it makes sense. It would be absurd for someone who did not truly profess the Catholic faith to have authority over Catholics who did. The principle that someone who defects from the faith automatically loses his office applies to pastors, diocesan bishops, and other similar church officials. The principle that someone who defects from the faith automatically loses his office applies to pastors, diocesan bishops, and other similar church officials. It also applies to a pope. Theologians and canonists such as Robert Bellarmine, Catechin, Suarez, Torquemada, and Wernes and Vindel maintain, without compromising the doctrine of papal infallibility, that even a pope, as an individual of course, may himself become a heretic and thus lose his pontificate. Some of these authors also maintain that a pope can become a schismatic. In his great thesis on the Roman pontiff, St. Robert Bellarmine, for example, asked the question whether a heretical pope can be deposed. Note first, by the way, that this question assumes that a pope can in fact become a heretic. After a lengthy discussion, Bellarmine concludes, a pope who is a manifest heretic automatically per se ceases to be a pope and head, just as he ceases automatically to be a Christian and a member of the church. Wherefore he can be judged and punished by the church. This is the teaching of all the ancient fathers, who teach that manifest heretics immediately lose all jurisdiction. Universal loss of faith during Benedict's reign, 2005 to 2013. Weekly mass attendance is at an all-time low in Western Europe. Only 1 in 5 Catholics in Spain report going to a service once a week. In Germany, it's 1 in 6, and fewer than 1 in 10 in France, according to researchers by the Few Forum on Religious and Public Life. Benedict XVI, who wrote as a modernist heretic who purposely distorts Catholic beliefs. He is not a Catholic and therefore could never have been Pope. God's truth, on the other hand, doesn't change. Theology is an exact science and precise terminology. On March 16, 2016, Benedict XVI ironically lamented that millions of Catholics had lost the faith. He has been the cause of much of this. The documents of Vatican II had helped compose the 68 books he wrote. His leading role in the modern church since Vatican II, his acceptance of sexual perversion in his clergy, and lack of compassion for its victims continues to lead souls astray. It is a very little late to lament over the devastation he caused.
A night of excitement and a night of firsts. 1.2 billion Catholics rejoice as the 266th Pope is chosen. And what a surprising choice it really was. Jorge Mario Bergoglio is his name. He's the former Archbishop of Buenos Aires. He's the first pontiff from the Americas, first Jesuit Pope, first non-European in almost 1,300 years. He's also the first Francis. So tonight we go inside this historic development for the faith.
Jesuit Francis I, George Bergoglio, is one of the most famous people on the planet today. In 2013, he was chosen as the Time magazine Person of the Year. He is so popular because he tells people what they want to hear. When his Marxist or modernist beliefs surface, crowds and individuals are often stunned that a pope cannot so openly profess communist ideology, justify sinful lifestyles, or treat religion as if it had no relevance today. His smile conceals a cold heart. He is vindictive and passive-aggressive. Francis doesn't care about the spiritual welfare of his flock, but he uses his celebrity status to gain worldwide fame and popularity to spread the modernist message. He helps millions that are drifting away from God justify their sinful lifestyle by condoning it. Many see through the shallow veneer and resent of a socialist communist posing as a vicar of Christ. He calls himself Pope, and millions of Catholics acknowledge his claim, yet in doing so they follow him, not Christ. He takes the popular aspects of our Lord's message and trims off the teachings that are difficult or not politically correct. Francis' idea of the papacy seems to be that of a world ambassador who is friendly with everyone and accepts all religions as equally good. He demonstrates this by attending religious ceremonies of all other religions and by promoting dialogue with false religions. During the 2005 conclave, Cardinal Bergoglio told voters to pick Cardinal Ratzinger, who was short of votes. Ratzinger received 84 votes. Bergoglio came in second with 26. Benedict XVI returned the favour by resigning and opening the door for Bergoglio. Elected on March 13, 2013, at the age of 76, with the majority of 115 cardinal electors, Cardinal Bergoglio chose the name Francis I to manifest his love for the poor and environment. In a gesture of fellowship, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I attended the installment ceremony. Francis I chose for his residence Dominus Sanctae Martyr, located within the Vatican, rather than the papal apartments. Since Pope Pius XI and John Paul I were both allegedly murdered there, it may have been a good idea to find lodgings elsewhere. On May 13th, Francis I said, "I really need to start making changes right now." He did. The technique Francis used is ingenious and patterned after his predecessor, John Paul II. Although he is not a professional actor, he seems trained for the role. His broad smile and charismatic personality concealed the wolf hidden under his white cassock. Bergoglio is a Marxist modernist who promotes utopian redistribution of wealth and class warfare. He compares capitalism to ideology, as is shown in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium. On November 24, 2013, it mirrors John Paul II's encyclical Redemptio Missio and the message given to the Vatican II Constitution on the Church in the modern world. Even the press noticed Bergoglio's Marxist leanings. A cartoon in Investor's Business Daily in 2014 depicted Francis I offering the new Mass at St. Peter's with the words reading from the Holy Gospel according to Marx. USA Today quoted Rush Limbaugh calling Francis I a Marxist and a clown. Limbaugh said Francis promoted pure Marxism and noted wherever socialists have gained power, they have done nothing but spread poverty. And to hear the Pope regurgitating this stuff, I was profoundly disappointed. On May 22nd, 2013, during a sermon in Rome, Francis I stressed that good atheists will go to heaven. The headline was quite shocking. Pope Francis says atheists can do good and go to heaven too. In a letter written in September 2013 to the Italian newspaper La Repubblica, Italy's largest daily newspaper, Pope Francis told atheists, "It's not belief in God that counts, but a clean conscience that determines who goes to heaven. Unfortunately, telling atheists to follow their erroneous consciences is more dangerous than having a guide leading an expedition through a dangerous pass using a faulty GPS device. The readings will not be accurate and the group could suffer serious injury or get stranded and die. Francis I never explained what was meant by doing good. Francis I supports non-Catholics receiving communion in Catholic churches and believes the Eucharist is only a symbol of God's love to humanity. He also allows Catholics to receive communion in non-Catholic churches. During his visit to Turin on November 15, 2015, he told a Lutheran wife who asked to receive communion with her Catholic husband to talk to the Lord and then go forward. The Turin Archdiocese then began offering ecumenical masses, celebrated jointly by Anglicans, Baptists, Catholics, Lutherans. When Francis visited the United States, September 19th to the 25th, instead of speaking in defense of life, he addressed a joint session of Congress and spoke of environmental dangers and global warming. During his speech on September 23rd, he lumped together abortion victims, victims of hunger and bombing, the elderly and immigrants, even though Congress threatened a government shutdown in order to oppose funding to pro-abortion Planned Parenthood for the alleged sale of aborted babies' body parts. Francis I ignored the issue completely. America has the largest and most organised pro-life movement in the world. The most powerful religious leader in the world could have made a difference in saving thousands of lives, but chose to remain silent. On December 7th, 2017, Francis claimed the Lord's Prayer phrase, "Lead us not into temptation," needed to be changed since the translation was faulty. If that is true, how can anyone have certitude about any Bible verse? Reuters noted that millions of Catholics memorized the prayer since childhood, that the vernacular versions came from the Latin Vulgate, which was derived from the ancient Greek version. That in turn was translated from the original Aramaic Jesus spoke. Francis, by doubting the veracity of a prayer that came directly from Christ, attacks the credibility of all scripture and even that of ancient documents. Francis called the Holy Spirit a disaster when addressing the international convention sponsored by the Institute of Consecrated Life and the Societies of Apostolic Life. Then there is something else. This Holy Spirit is a disaster. He never tires of being creative. On March 17, 2017, Francis I blasphemously mocked the Blessed Trinity by representing the three divine persons as a group of arguing adolescents. During an audience with Dr. Kuda, he said, "Inside the Holy Trinity, they're all arguing behind closed doors." Kuda says Francis told them, but on the outside, they give the picture of unity. Francis called traditional Catholics rigid and insecure level gazers. Even though non-diocesan Latin masses have more than doubled in the US and France in 10 years. On April 27, 2014, Francis declared John Paul II and John the 23rd saints. 4 years later, on October 14, 2018, he canonized Paul VI. They were not saints, but evil, talented instruments of the devil. John the 23rd began Vatican II and is responsible for its result universal loss of faith. Paul VI approved its documents, formed a new invalid mass and new sacraments. John Paul II spread heretical beliefs through the world and has to answer for allowing molestation of children by his clergy worldwide. Millions were deceived who followed these heretics who were wolves in sheep clothing. False popes and heretics cannot be saints. The modern church cannot possibly be the church Christ founded, since it cannot even get canonizations right. How could men be rewarded eternally in heaven who were the direct cause of millions of Catholics losing their faith? Unfortunately, millions blindly follow Francis I, regardless of what he says or does. The beliefs of Francis I are so blatantly heretical in the fields of faith and morals that an article in Politico employed the words heretic in the Vatican for the title of such an article on him, this is not surprising, considering his stand on condoning cohabitation, divorce and homosexuality, his belief in universal salvation, and his claim that the damned are annihilated. Since the death of Pope Pius XII on October 9, 1958, modernist impostors John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI and Francis I have occupied the throne of Peter. Since 6 of these traitors are heretics, they cannot be popes. They created and nurtured a counterfeit Catholicism. Faithful Catholics today follow the 260 popes from St. Peter to Pope Pius XII. If a legitimate pope reigned at the present time, they would definitely follow him. Most of the 6 impostor popes wear the Pope's mitre and Archbishop's pallium in place of a papal tiara, to show they despise the Pope's threefold office, to teach, rule and sanctify. Faithful Catholics don't follow these papal impostors because they believe in the dogma of papal infallibility, that the Pope is protected by God from ever leading the Church astray when he teaches the universal Church on matters of faith and morals. Faithful Catholics reject the 6 impostor popes because they teach heresy and are not Catholic, even though they claim to be. Popes are the successors of St. Peter and are the vicars of Christ on earth, who must preserve the unchangeable teachings of Christ, the Mass and the sacraments. Many who acknowledge John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI and Francis as legitimate popes try to justify their heretical teachings by claiming their words are sublime and misunderstood. Why then does the common person have no idea of what they are saying? Jesus always spoke clearly and precisely and made no ambiguous statements. The fathers and doctors of the Church, popes, general councils and saints spoke and wrote with the clarity that is still apparent today. Today, many don't know and don't seem to care what the Pope believes or teaches, but simply see him as a celebrity who wants to be everyone's friend. Many don't realise the facts relating to the last 6 claimants to the chair of Peter, but simply take things as face value. Since John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, Benedict XVI and Francis have promoted heretical teachings, they are not vicars of Christ. They are not members of the Catholic Church because they believe and teach heretical doctrines. A heretical pope is an impossibility. One cannot be both a pope and a heretic. If these men are not members of the Catholic Church, they are obviously cannot be its head. Canon Law 2314(1) states that heretics, those who deny one or more de fide dogmas of the Catholic Church, are automatically excommunicated and are no longer members of the Catholic Church. Canon 188 Section 4 teaches that heretics automatically lose their office. Unfortunately, millions follow the false doctrines and sacrilegious worship service of the Vatican II era popes without question. Regardless of what they say or do, Francis abandons the flock and leaves the gate open so wolves can enter and slaughter the sheep. Our Lord's condemnation of the Pharisees can be applied to him and the modernists. You broods of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. Woe to you, blind guides, blind ones, hypocrites, because you are like white sculptures, which outwardly appear to men beautiful, but within are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. Serpents, broods of vipers, how are you to escape the judgment of hell? How could so many people lose their faith after Vatican II? It has happened before. Noah and 7 others remained faithful to God, while the rest of the world perished in the flood. Only a handful of his followers remained faithful to our Lord as he is hung on the cross. Many in Palestine rejected Jesus Christ around the year 33 AD. Many in the Middle East left the church and became Islamic by the year 630. Many in Asia and Europe left the church and became Orthodox in the year 1054. Many in Europe left the church and became Protestant by the year 1517. Many throughout the world left the church and became modernist by the year 1970. The great apostasy we are witnessing today was prophesied by Jesus Christ and St. Paul. Yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find, do you think, faith on the earth? Luke 18:8. Let no one deceive you in any way, for the day of the Lord will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 and 4. For they are false apostles, deceitful workers, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself disguises himself as an angel of light. It is no great thing then, if the ministers disguise themselves as ministers of justice, but their end will be according to their works. 2 Corinthians 11:13-15. Let no one lead you astray with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the children of disobedience. Do not then become partakers with them, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk then as children of light. Ephesians 5:6-8. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus quoted this passage from the prophet Zacharias that was fulfilled on Holy Thursday, when the Good Shepherd, Christ, was stricken and the sheep, the apostles, were scattered. Following the death of Pope Pius XII, a similar condition occurred in the Church. This was foreseen by Pope Leo XIII and incorporated in his exorcism prayer to St. Michael. He also wrote, "Crafty enemies have filled the Church, the spouse of the Immaculate Lamb, with bitterness and inbraided her with woodworm. They have laid their impious hands on all that is beautiful in her. Where the see of the most blessed Peter and the chair of truth for the light of the Gentiles was established, there they have set the throne of the abomination of their impiety, that having struck the shepherd, they might scatter the flock." Even though there is currently no valid pope reigning, it doesn't mean the Church ceases to operate. The past vicars of Christ on earth left a roadmap for Catholics of all ages to follow. In spite of constant attacks from within and without, the Catholic Church remains as vibrant as ever. With fervent adherents, young and old fill Catholic churches throughout the world, and young people instill new life into Catholic schools, seminaries and convents. The traditions, practices and belief Christ taught continue to be faithfully passed down from generation to generation.